My name is Clark Raines. I was born in Woodbury, Tennessee in 1929. I was drafted in the Army in November of 1950. Took my basic training in Camp Pickett, Virginia. And from there, went to Camp Stoneman, California, by troop train. When I finished my basic training in Camp Pickett, Virginia, we rode a troop train to Camp Stoneman, California. I was there about 8 days being processed. Then we caught the ship, General USS Anderson, and went from there to Japan. Camp Drake about a day or two, and then we went from there to, I believe, Pusan or Incheon, Korea. I got to the my division, or the 7th Division, 17th Infantry Regiment, first day of April. That was exactly 5 months from the day I entered the service. Then when they took us up on the hill to where our K Company was at, they just had moved off the hill and left to the next hill, so we had to run to catch up with them. I was a PFC and was assigned to K Company as a rifleman. When we caught up with the group, they were going up another hill, and I done give out, thought I had everything I could carry with me, but they handed me another radio. Some of the troops that was already there, they was tired too. They said, here's a fresh man, we'll give him this radio to carry. So we made it up to the next hill, top of the hill that night, and I was put in a foxhole with a Filipino and a Chinese. Chow was the Chinese, Kabibi was the Filipino, and we really made good friends. Chow was a Chinese American. He was drafted from Hawaii, and Kabibi was a Filipino. He'd fought in World War II against the Japs, and we became best of friends, and we were together all the time I was there. They assigned me to a foxhole with Chow and Kabibi, and of course they were foreigners to me. I'd never been out of Woodbury hardly, and it kind of took a while to get used to them. And but we became best of friends. Of course, the enemy was attacking at night, and I don't remember, we were there on that hill for probably about a week. They bring the chow up to us once a day, and we'd eat sea rations the rest of the time. Then from there, we went to, when it first came under artillery fire or anything, I didn't know you could get so close to the ground as you could. And I learned more in 30 minutes in battle than I did the whole basic training, I felt like. But everything I learned, it come in handy. Then the next battle that I remember is we relieved L Company one morning. The Chinese had held them down all night, and they had took some casualties. Well, we went up next morning early to relieve them. I think it was the 30th of May. L Company had been pinned down all night and had took several casualties. So early that morning, they sent us up to relieve L Company, and it put me, myself, and Brian out as scouts. Well, we got near to the top of the hill. It was foggy, but we saw these two Chinese soldiers there. So Brian and I both fired at him. He said he killed them. Maybe he did, I don't know. But when we got there, they were dead anyway. I was at that time carrying a BAR, and so we stayed there on the hill until lunchtime. Half of us went to eat lunch at noon, and then we come back and relieve the rest of them. And while we were there, I'd already ate, me and my buddy had, And we saw this Chinese coming up the hill. We thought, well, we'll walk out there and get him. But we walked out in the middle of a bunch of them, and they cut loose firing on us. Well, Brian had a 45 pistols, all he had, and I had this BAR. Well, he hit the ground, and I sprayed the area over him with that BAR. We got back in our foxholes, and we had about a 4-hour battle there. And lucky, we'd only lost one man killed, I believe. And they said there were 100 or more dead Chinese out there on the end of the hill when we took it over later in the afternoon. Then from there, it was just patrol and go out on patrols and stuff. Well, we were set up on the hill, and every day they would send out 2 of us to scout the area about a mile, the next hill, you know, and see if we could encounter any of the enemy. And that was a scared feeling when you get a mile away from everybody else, you and one more buddy. And you know you're the next one in front of you is your enemy. But then the next real battle, that, of course, I was promoted to corporal after 6 weeks there. They rotate home a lot of guys were rotating, a lot of guys getting wounded and sent back. So they would give us a promotion about every 6 weeks. And I made corporal. And then 6 weeks later, I made staff sergeant. I was staff sergeant 8 days before I'd been in the service 10 months. And on the 31st of August, we got the orders to attack Hill 851. The Chinese had it. So we left. We were supposed to leave real early that morning, but the fog was so bad we had to wait until about daylight. And at that point, I was squad leader, and I'd been made staff sergeant 8 days earlier. Then we fought 851. We took the hill that afternoon after all day fighting. Then we were running out of ammunition that night, probably 10 o'clock, 11 sometime. And we were ordered to withdraw, but they left my platoon there to hold the enemy off until the rest of them pulled back to Hill 820. And we had lost 2, I think we just lost 2 men. We had several wounded. We had 2 men that were killed that day that I knew. Sergeant Robert Clark, he was from Texas, and he was 38-year-old. He'd been through the World War II. So we called him the old man of the outfit. Then they called in artillery before we got off of the hill, and I'm sure that it was enemy fire that got us. These 4 rounds fell right in the middle of us. And Kimball Smith from North Carolina, he got a leg broke and couldn't get him back to the next hill. He died that night. And outside of that, the rest of us were wounded, all but about maybe 10 or 15 out of the whole platoon. We were all shrapnel wounded. They called in artillery on us before we got off of the hill. It was friendly fire, I feel like. I rode back to Japan on the airplane with Lieutenant Barge. He was wounded, and he told me he had talked to the company commander, and the company commander asked him if we were off the hill, and he told him no, we wasn't off. He said, well, the artillery's on the way. And about that time, it hit right in the middle of us. From there, we got back to Hill 820 and laid there on the stretcher all night. When we finally took Hill 851, but the Chinese were counterattacking us, and we were running out of ammunition. We stayed there till about 10 o'clock at night, and we threw hand grenades at them and everything as long as we could. Then we got orders to pull off the hill. They left my platoon there, our platoon. I was squad leader at that time. Left us there to hold the enemy off until we got back to Hill 820. Well, this artillery came in on us and wounded a bunch of us. We all made it back to Hill 820, but Kimball Smith. He's the only one that didn't get back. Well, they would come at you just like, kind of like a flock of geese, a bunch of them at a time. And of course, it was night at that time so we got back to Hill 820, and I laid there on a stretcher until the next morning. They carried the South Koreans, they would carry the wounded off. They carried off as many as they could that night, and the rest of us had to wait till daylight the next day. And they came, got us, and carried us about a mile down them hills back to the aid station. And from there, we caught a plane back to Sendai, Japan. I stayed in the hospital there from middle of September, somewhere in September, until I came home in February, I believe it was, after that, back to the States. Our company commander at that time was Captain Bannister, and he was from New York. He came over as a lieutenant, and he got promoted from there up to the company commander. He was my platoon leader there for a while when he first got there. And I understand he died in '92 with cancer. I met James Shelton at the reunion, and he knew Bannister. He was an officer too, Shelton was. He lives in Ohio.